Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over the 9-inch lift on the CRV, brought to you by a random parking lot that I found. If you guys would, go ahead and slap me a thumbs up, go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and maybe even share this with your friends if they're interested in this type of content. But let's get into this. I'm sure you guys would much rather see this thing flexed out, but I was trying to give myself a little bit more room to lay under it. So for starts, this is kind of a full frame setup now. So this was a setup that I came up with. These are 6-inch spacers, box styled. They're open on the back side, bolted to my Kmember, and bolted to the factory location where the Kmember would be. The rear is a similar setup, except there's a washer welded on the top of this 1/4-inch steel, and the bolt goes all the way up through with an extension and bolts that in. There would be a second one here, but Rust has claimed that. So mine only has this interior one. This is the factory bushing location for your trailing arm. That's where this inner bolt would be. All of this is 2-inch by 4-inch square tubing. So now that you understand that that is boxed out, there's also a spacer on the inner for the Kmember and a spacer on the outer for the Kmember. I have a bolt puddle welded in the top here, so these are actually threaded in using a pipe wrench. You can see the marks there. And then these bolts are puddle welded in, but obviously they stick down through and I can put a nut on the end of them. These inner ones are the exact same, except they were repurposed from another lifted CRV rather than this boxing on the frame rail. Another thing that will need to be done, you will need to drop the engine the same amount that you drop your Kmember. So here's one mount, boxed out, bolts in the factory location, and allows you to put another mount in. This one is literally just the bracket cut in half and 6 inches of plate welded in, and then I notched it so I could run my power steering. This mount obviously is stock. My torque mount is a solid mount. So this is bolted to the factory location in here. And then I have a plate going up and down to keep all of this square. It's all welded together, and then it's capped back in for my mount. And so that it doesn't go anywhere, I also threw a little bit of a weld on the frame. It's also welded on the back side along the power steering pump here. Back to the passenger transmission mount, I threw a tack weld here, and it's actually welded all the way down along this inside edge here. And the rear mount has absolutely no drop. It comes with the Kmember. So the T-bracket and the mount are all standard location. Another question I'm probably gonna get. Your radiator hoses obviously need extended if you're gonna leave this in the factory location. This hose could be cut. See how much extra I have here? Huge hard angle. That could most likely be cut down and coupled if you needed to. The upper, this is the factory hose. And then I don't know why, this was already on one of the CRVs that I got. So I took advantage of that and clamped it back in to achieve this. But yeah, as far as I know, this is 1.5" EMT conduit. It might be 1 1/4 if I'm not mistaken. I know that D series are slightly smaller and I use 1-inch EMT. But yeah, you could easily couple your hoses and do what you need to do to extend this. Also, on top of that, your heater core hose, this short one here, has a lot of tension on it, so you're going to need a longer hose. I suggest just reusing or repurposing the other heat hose here. So you're going to have to buy another one or get a used one and repurpose that for your short side. Fuel lines are going to be another concern. The return line here has more than enough length. You don't need to worry about it. Your supply line, on the other hand, you cannot get away with leaving your filter location in the stock location. So you're gonna either have to remount it to one of these studs down lower so there's no tension on this hose, but I choose to just let mine chill. As for the rear suspension, things are definitely a little different back here. So this is repurposed from my last CRV. You're gonna notice some stress cracks here where I just had like locked them temporarily, but these plates are taking all of the work. So what I had done is jack the vehicle up, let these full droop. So these are full tilt. And then I locked everything into place. I welded all these bars together, and then I cut off the actual factory location mount. So this is all solid all the way across. I'll look from the other side so you guys can kind of get an idea of what this looks like. The diff is locked in with everything too. In addition to doing so, I would have lost toe adjustment. So that is what these bars take care of back here. Again, this was repurposed from another CRV. So some of this is a little messy in here. I used to have brackets up here, terrible idea. And then these were adjustable, but because of these brackets, it was causing stress. So yeah, the washers, larger bolt, this is all mounted together, so there's still a little bit of play. I didn't weld anything to it, but toe has been dialed in pretty well, and so has the camber before this was welded. So in addition to the rear being a solid suspension, these trailing arms are plated. As you can see, this goes all the way around the trailing arm and is plated back in. There's also another plate behind here that keeps this from being able to flex left or right. And then this, as a part of my forelink, is welded in, and it is welded in on the back side as well. I'm on the other side, but here's the plate on the back side that's tied in, and then the entire back side of the trailing arm is plated as well. So this comes all the way down the seam, notches out so I can change wheel bearings, is welded all the way around to the front, which is capped in as well. And then inside of here, I plated as well. I'll go ahead and throw a picture in there so you guys can see that. The reason I went solid axle, I've tried doing drop mounts off of these trailing arms and they always bend. I had 6-inch extensions off of these and they ended up bending. That was my first try. My second try, again, extending them, I ended up with a massive like toe camber issue. These were just terribly bending. So I plated them this round because my prior ones had issues bending. They would get camber and toe at the same time, simultaneously they would bend. Repurposed from an old setup. These are approximately 6 1/4, maybe 6.5 inch tall spacers. This is an old top hat with the ring cut off so that I could weld. And then this is a stock top hat with the studs cut off and ground down so that I could weld. But you guys are gonna be like, oh, that's no lift at all. Again, I welded this on full droop. So look at those control arms at a steep angle. So this doesn't need to be as much because it's already pushing the outward angle downward past where it needs to be. So a 1/2 inch here with that angle and geometry at the bottom is 1.5 inches overall lift past this actual spacing. Most importantly, this is a 4-link setup to my trailing arms. So we need to talk about that. I have a 2-inch spacer welded in to get my packs away from the frame rail so that they can clear my mounting point here, which isn't by much, but it does clear. And then the tilt on here is because one of mine are mounted at the top a little further back and the other one is as far out at the bottom as I can go. These are a 3/4 inch shank bolt. As you can see, I put some Sharpie lines on a couple things here to ensure they haven't moved on me. The lower one is all the way up tight against the factory location of the seam here. And then it is welded all the way around. The upper is sandwiched into my plate that I added and put up against the factory seam in the back. And put up against the factory seam in the back. And also welded into the factory seam in the front. Also, I chose to do my pan hard bar like this. It is bolted, the tack welds up there are just to keep it from moving or reassurance to make sure that it hasn't moved. But I would also advise bringing your pan hard bar down level with your axle. That's where it should be. So even if it was in the middle here, or even if it was coming off the back of this, I would somehow bring it back and down so it's centered with your drive line. The reason I recommend lowering that is when this tilts, it's like a hinge. It actually throws the body a little bit more off the center of the drive line. Because it's so high, it's like opening a book. I don't know how to describe it any other way, but it's like the middle of the binding of a book. You know how it tilts when you open and close it? That's what it reminds me of, is this huge like throw. Just kind of feels weird coming in and out of parking lots. I feel like if it was centered on the drive line, it would hold you more centered over your wheelbase. So that's the majority for the rear. Let's take a look at the front. Number 1, I have 7-inch extended spindles. These are 2 spindles cut to do this job. So there's a cut at this puddle weld, and then a second set cut at this puddle weld, so that I had more overlap. Right? And then there's a 2.5-inch spacer in here from shortening spindles for Civics that I threw in here. So this puddle weld is drilled where my welds would have been on the cast, sleeved over, and then it is pinned. So this bolt goes all the way through to the backside. It's puddled back here and it's puddled up here. So even if this weld breaks, even if there was an issue where this tried to bend, it cannot separate. This piece cannot fall out. Same thing for down here. It is pinned all the way through. You can actually see the bolt head on this one. And then it's puddle welded on the backside. And then this was drilled into the weld and puddle welded. So it's sleeved, welded, sleeved all the way up. This is where the weld would have been. It's all dremeled out and everything. This is where the other weld would have been, all dremeled out. And then it's puddle welded. Only one of these were welded fully all the way through. The other one was just cut and beveled out in the front and rear for these puddles, making these approximately 7 inches longer than stock. I highly, highly, highly recommend coming up with a setup similar to this. So this is sleeved over top of a Maxpeedingrod coilover bottom. So I took the whole cup, I cut it in half, and then I sleeved this 10-inch long pipe over it. And then I welded it in on each end. The reason I recommend that, when you're under full droop, the spring is actually too wide to sit in here. So if we had a huge spacer up here, this coil would be here, and then you would have this rubbing on it constantly. Second reason, there's a lot of stress on this top hat. So if it's down here and you're putting a lot of stress on it, the chances of it kicking out are higher. As to where if you had stock struts and you were to sleeve this all the way up, and it were to still clamp at the factory bottom somehow, and then you had your 6, 8, or 10-inch spacing, whatever you chose to go with, there would be less stress because this is overlapping the entire strut. I also have this 1.5-inch spacer up here, but that's because I didn't want to max out my threads. So I chose to crank this back up and put this spacer in here just to cover my own ass. As for the drive shaft, it is in the factory location. And while mounting it up, I destroyed my seal, so don't mind the fact that grease is everywhere. But this is the factory length from that mounting location to this mounting location. My 4-link allows the adjustment so the rear end is spaced where it needs to be. It's bolted in factory, and then this bar goes from one side of my frame to the other. With it sitting on flat ground, this was completely straight. So while driving down the road, there should be less stress on this bearing and this joint, along with the U-joints at the ends of the drive shaft. But again, I ripped this rubber seal installing it. 100%, I swear to you, that's ripped. It's not that it's overstressed. I have all-wheel drive at all times, but I need a new drive shaft now. Another big one's gonna be steering. So let's go ahead and check out what's going on with that. This is the worst possible way to do it, but I'll teach you guys how to do it right. I unbolted this. Well, I have to get an angle from outside to understand more. But there is a pivot right here. What you need to do on your build is cut your steering shaft, mark one of these lines so you keep it straight, slide it all the way out until this U-joint is even with the edge of this, because then it wouldn't have this hard angle. We're going to look outside so you understand why. So as you can see, that is completely off-centered. But if you were to extend the shaft inside, but you put your steering knuckle more centered of that stock factory hole, then this shaft could come straight down to this knuckle without, I would assume, any bind or issues. And then this knuckle that you see here that I have it extended maybe 5 inches, but you could do that significantly less if your shaft was centered to this hole up here. I'm sure some of you have already noticed this, but you could easily drill out the spot welds on these brackets and relocate these downward and do whatever you need to do. So this is factory held here. I don't know, you could drill a hole, zip tie it so it can't rattle around, get tugged on, hit by branches, whatever. But obviously it's 6 inches lower, so maybe you should drop this 6 inches lower. I choose not to care. As for the rear, I'm sure that you could probably repurpose your lines, because these are supposed to be mounted somewhere up in here, and I brought them up to the top. So this is still factory on full droop. There's no tension here. And then I welded the bracket to here because I don't care. You, on the other hand, could mount studs, drill these out, whatever you got to do to mount that. But yes, probably the same length of line to make this work. As for exhaust work, obviously I chose to dump mine out the hood, but let's say you had a factory header and you were trying to repurpose your full length factory exhaust. Your factory header would come out here. Absolutely no reason it could not fit under the skid plate. It will come out right there. What I would do if I were you is a slight offset up to get it away from the ground. Carry it back, go over top of this brace. I would continue back to right in front of this gas tank. And the reason I say that, this drive shaft now moves with the rear end. So you don't want to get in this area. But you can bring it back 90 in the factory location. It would hump over this, and then you would be on this side. So again, we're coming all the way back, parallel, and then we're going to come up and over. So I would try to keep it completely level on this side of your drive shaft so that it clears with a couple inches, and then I would 90 in front of this axle, completely 90 it straight up for a second, and then take it up to where you want it to be up here. So again, we would be coming underneath of our toe set, but above our drive axle, 90. That would come up straight up through here. Let's say you even had this panhard bar. Come straight up, you can 90 over top of this, and then carry it out to where your factory muffler would be. And then it would come out where your factory exhaust tip would be. I know I'm gonna get a lot of questions about the road sign and the hitch. So this is actually a piece of square tubing. I did not do this. I actually got this on a used CRV. But it was a piece of square tubing welded to the factory tow hooks, 2x2, comes all the way across and is welded to this tow hook. It even has the factory bar in it. And then on top of that, they welded a 6-inch receiver to it so he could pull cars out. And then this is on here for Silver Lake sand dunes in Michigan, so he could put his flag in the hole. But as for the skid plate, I actually don't have anything mounting it to the square tubing up here, but I cut it out around the receiver. It's slid over, and then it's zip screwed to my Kmember right now. And that's literally just to offer a little bit of protection, keep sticks and stones out of everything in here. And most of you are probably going to be asking, so these are a 24 by 10 wide with a 305/35. Again, 24-inch rim. These are a 12-inch wide tread and almost a 33-inch tall tire. I can turn full lock. It doesn't hit the frame, and it doesn't even hit my mounts. On top of that, these are Jeep pattern. So there are wheel spacers, and then that wasn't enough, so there's another 2-inch wheel spacer. So I have 4 inches of spacer, and then a 10-inch rim with a 12-inch tire. So yeah, I hope that answers most of your guys' questions. If you have any more, go ahead and drop in the comments, and I will do my best to answer everything that you guys ask.